Good evening, friends. Good late night for those of you in Europe and Israel. Hello to my friends here in New York. I haven't seen some of you in quite a few days or a week or so. It feels longer after our daily, many COVID days relationships. I'm glad to see many of you, and I'm glad to see new faces or folks we haven't seen in a while. Welcome to our spiritual survival skills salon. Lab Shul started these many months ago when our COVID adventure began as ways to think of what we can do, what's in our toolkit as humans, as Jews, as New Yorkers, as people to survive and to thrive. And it's been a blessing and a gift in the middle of all these troubling days to be in community with so many of you and to find the tools we have to help us survive and thrive. So thank you for joining me tonight. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Amichai Lau Levi. I'm the founding rabbi of Lab Shul. I'm here in my home in Harlem. And for the next hour, I want to invite us to continue a conversation some of you were on a few weeks ago, and many of us are on in so many ways, about these days that we are in the middle of on the Jewish calendar and what they may have meant to our ancestors who crafted them as tools for grief for us today, wherever we are in the world, wherever we are, and how can we take these days, these ancient technologies of consciousness, and adapt them to what might be helpful to us these days. So that's my invitation to us. An hour won't be enough, but we will begin. It's humbling to see teachers and friends and even relatives with us today from all over. Many of you experts in mental health and healing in ways that I am not. And so let's consider this a conversation. I will share some texts with you all from the Jewish tradition and other traditions, and we'll talk more and learn more. I'm also um, very excited that one of my teachers and dear friends, Jack Saul, is here today. And Jack has been really a role model in how we work with um, moral injury, that which we're all carrying right now, and how we make our way towards moral repair. So, Jack, it's an honor to have you with us, and at some point we'll love to hear from you some thoughts as well. Those of you who are with us at our Reveal-a-thon heard Jack in conversation with one of his esteemed colleagues on this topic. And if you were with us last year at the Days of Awe, Jack's teaching was a prime part of what we were talking about then, what we'll talk about again this year. So I'm going to introduce us. I'm going to start with a song that I will share that does not come from the Jewish tradition per se, but is dear to my heart. And I want to invite you to sit down wherever you are, even with more kavanah, with more intention. Close your eyes, perhaps. Let's take a breath. Let the Zoom be a little different than the Zoom before and the Zoom after. Let this be a collection of people sitting together to breathe and learn and be. I'm grateful to Marika for helping us get started, but then I'm going to try and moderate the solo. So thanks for your patience. I'm going to share a song with you all. It comes from a modern poet and a complicated person. Um, and I am a little mortified that I forget her updated name. Shaheda, I believe, but Sinead O'Connor, whose lyrics are in the box now, who became a Muslim a few years ago on her spiritual path, wrote this song as part of a track of an album called Universal Mother. It was released in the 90s and changed my life. Here's
Hey,
the song.
Amichai, you
Yeah.
actually shared the lyrics to everyone in the waiting room rather than everyone in the meeting.
Well, it's unfortunate. Thanks for being here. Everyone in the meeting should have it now. And everyone in the waiting room, enjoy. Here's the song. Consider this a kavanah, our intention for getting this evening of grief and despair and growth as an invitation.
I'd a terrible broken heart. broken heart. You were born on the day my mother was buried. My grief, my grief, my grief, my grief, my grief. You were born on the day my mother was buried. My grief, my grief, my grief, my grief, my grief.
Indeed. So from Sinead's haunting invitation into grief, personal family grief, we are in a moment of the Jewish calendar. So even though we are in the middle of so much in our lives right now, unprecedented, I want to take a moment about the big picture before we go back into our hearts. Today's the third day of the month of Av. It is the month that in our tradition we say begins with less gladness and an attempt to be in less gladness. These are the 9 days, the 9 narrow days, the dire straits. They are part of the 3 weeks, and they will culminate next Thursday with the 9th of Av, the fast that for over 2,000 years in our Jewish tradition marks historical tragedies, calamities, exiles, the burning of all that we deem sacred. It is a fast day, and it's one that has become familiar in Jewish, more religious context as the day of, I would say, a national political context of what does it mean to people that remember these generations of trauma. And yet Israel is around. And as a kid growing up in Israel, we kind of aware that there was like a weird thing going on. We're like lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem, but like we're in Jerusalem. And so it became clear for me as a young man that this is about a metaphor, that on the one hand, Tisha B'Av in these 9 days and these 3 weeks are about our political, historical Jewish memory of trauma that we still carry, Holocaust being just one of the more recent moments in our history. And yet it is also about something else, not just about historical, collective, ethnic, Jewish, national grief. It's also about grief. And in years past, through Lab Shul and other contexts, the day of Tisha B'Av has become for many of us a day of exploring what does it mean to be in solidarity with others in grief. But 5 years ago, we met outside the UN at the UN chapel with friends in faith from the African American community and the Muslim communities, Christian communities, to respond to the burning of churches that took place that summer, and was a way for us to say we are honoring and humbled by the memory of our burned temple while houses of worship and lives are being taken by hatred all around us. So Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, for us has become over the years a marker of what's broken and of where we can rise. Over the years, we've also dedicated this day, Tisha B'Av, this fast, as the first day of our season of renewal, of the high holy days, the days of awe. We begin with what's broken so we can start building. And so this year, as we started thinking about what this day means, what the season means, it was apparent that we're all in grief. That we're all in mourning, that the burnt temples and the lost lives, the racial reality of injustice that we're in the middle of, the pandemic's price on the well-being and on the sanity and dignity of global citizens alike is an opportunity for us to take these days and just give ourselves the human right of grief, the basic container to be in a place where it's not a relative who died, And thank God I'm healthy, but I need a container to be in grief as a human right now. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. None of us do. I know what happened yesterday, and I'm choosing to be here now and to lean into the difficult place of grief. Why? So that we can grow from it. But let's leave the later for later. Let's just be in here for now. I'm going to share with you my screen with some text that I will share tonight. And my plan is to share some text and open up some conversation, really, and for all of us to respond. And in some ways, we're gonna continue this. Working on recently, written by some Christian clergy, grounded in the living word, the Old Testament, and pastoral care practices. And this is a quote about grief. And if you're hearing some singing in the background, I have a friend staying over and he's in the middle of a choir practice. So what are you going to do? This is COVID. It's all good. They're singing beautiful pastoral stuff from the 18th century or something. He was going to sing By the Waters of Babylon from the 18th century, I think, but we're going to play that at the end, I think. Here's a quote. Grieving is a process that cannot be rushed to get to the happy thoughts and self-satisfaction that our culture promotes. How you doing? I'm happy. Have a nice day. As a nation, we do not like to dwell on defeat or pain. We take pride in our can-do attitude of overcoming adversity. Lament helps us to tell our stories of suffering, loss, and pain. In the Jewish tradition, we know this because every year we have this opportunity to lament. Eicha, the Lamentations, the biblical scroll of lament, is what we're going to be chanting next week as part of the season. And so here's a very short text from the Mishnah, the Jewish text that is really one of the building blocks of our traditions that gives us what's happening. Where did this 9 days and this 9th day come about? And for those of you who are very versed with these texts, my apologies and welcome back. And for those of you who are not, my apologies for not framing it better, but we're just going to focus on this nugget. The Hebrew is on the top of your page and the English is there in the middle. I'm going to read it quickly. And those of you who were with me at the salon 2 weeks ago, we read the first part because we were on the 17th of Tammuz, the fast that began this season. The Mishnah writes, 5 events befell our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz and 5 on the 9th of Av. We are on the 3rd of Av, 17th of Tammuz, 2 weeks ago. On the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were broken. Moses broke the tablets. The Tamid offering, the sacrifice, was ended because of the siege of the enemies. The city walls of Jerusalem were breached, again, by the Romans. Apostamos burned the Torah, one of the Hellenic rulers of Jerusalem who was not in favor of religious freedom. An idol was placed in the temple courtyard. These are all ways in which the sacred is desecrated in mortal, fatal ways. On the 9th of Av, it was decreed upon our ancestors that they would not be allowed to enter the land of Israel. This is a mythic moment. The Hebrews who left Egypt as slaves traveled for 40 years, and on their way to the promised land, they were actually told that, nope, many of you won't enter. So this is a day of dashed dreams of entering home. The first and second temple were destroyed in the 7th century BCE and in the 1st century CE by the Assyrians and by the Romans. Beitar was captured, the last foothold of the Judean autonomy during the Second Commonwealth, captured and destroyed. The city of Jerusalem was plowed over a few years after the destruction and was renamed Ilia Capitolina, a Roman city. From when the month of Av starts, we reduce joy. This is a manipulation. This is a ritual manipulation that our ancestors put in place that for 9 days, as a Jew who cares about your Jewishness, and I will say as a human who cares about your humanity, you are induced to manipulate a state of consciousness that is about less joy. You're supposed to manipulate grief in some way. Forgive me if this sounds completely irrelevant, and maybe even irreverent. But I can only think of it as some kind of a ritual masturbation, meaning for those of us who are familiar with those erotic skills, you are doing something to induce pleasure. What the rabbis want us to do is to make ourselves not seek pleasure, but to cry. We are manipulating ourselves into grief, which again, at this moment in time, a lot of us don't need any reminders. Thank you very much. I just opened the news. I opened my eyes. But for thousands of years, the rabbis wanted us to manipulate our emotions. And so for 9 days, we're supposed to be active and passively participating in ways and ritual ways of being less in joy and more in somber grief. We'll talk about the emotional gift here in a little bit and what is or is not done. I'm going to ask you for your experience of this in a moment. But let me just share a couple more background texts before we continue. The next text on the page comes from the Talmud. It's the next part of our cultural tradition after the Mishnah. It's the next floor on the building of textual literacy. And this is a myth. This is a fragment of mythology. And the congregation lifted their voices and cried. These are the people of Israel, the ones who left Egypt and who've been in the desert, who have just been told, you are not entering the promised land. You will die in this desert as refugees. Your children will be the immigrants to the new reality. So imagine that night when the people who were like left slavery and wanted to go home are told, nope, not going to happen. Everybody cried. So the rabbis, the sages, the storytellers, the mythologists tell us when this night was. Rabbah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this is a Babylonian sage quoting a Galilean sage, that night was the evening of Tisha B'Av. That night was the 9th of Av. The original reason for why we fast on this day is not the destruction of the temple, the destruction of our desire to be in the homeland, in the temple. God said, they cried an unnecessary crying. I will establish this for them as a day of crying for generations. So whoever is telling the story is speaking on behalf of God and naming a God who is like not exactly our vision of a loving God, the God who's an angry God that says, you cried for no reason over this night where you're like, you're not going to go in. Oh boy, you're going to cry about this forever. We can spend all night deconstructing just this passage. What's the agenda of who wrote it? What are we saying about our people who have this night that we have been perpetuating for thousands of years where we cry for different reasons? But I don't want to do that. I just want to have that in the background of what we're talking about. The next thing that we're going to look at is a few of the texts that say what happens on these 9 days. How do we minimize joy and maximize grief, and then why? But before I do so, I do want to open it up for just a couple of minutes. And I want to ask those of you who are with us who might have experience with this tradition. You may have experienced a 9th of Av or 9 days as a child or as a grown-up, as somebody who learned about it or leaned into it. And I'd be really curious to hear, I'm sure we all will, like wiki this. What is a tradition or two that you are familiar with about these days, these dire straits? If anybody wants to share, feel free to unmute yourself and just briefly share. And if you're feeling more comfortable sharing in the box, literacy lives in many ways. So just introduce yourself and share. We have some new faces here tonight. I believe everybody can. You can.
I'm
Yeah,
okay.
please. Hi, Lisa.
I'll just share briefly. I don't know how many people saw this, but about a year ago, an artist, Taryn Simon, had at the Armory, she brought in mourners, grievers from around the world, and she built an architecture in this huge space of different like upside down wells, concrete wells, so that the sound of the grievers would travel up. And everybody that she brought in from different parts of the world, from Africa, from Azerbaijan, were all paid grievers, paid mourners in their countries. They were paid, they're invited. Forget about the transaction of money. There's some transaction that's made, that these healers or mourners are professional, and she brought them here from their country to mourn on call in a way for this American audience. And it was actually like absolutely moving, but it reminded me of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That, Lisa, I was there with a bunch of friends from the community, and it was remarkable. The text that we taught 2 weeks ago about the ancient pagan tradition of the season of summer includes the text about Ezekiel, the prophet, having a vision where he goes into the temple in Jerusalem and he sees the women keening and lamenting Tammuz, the dead god of the Sumerians who dies in summer and comes back in winter. He's the precursor of Persephone. And, you know, he's like, oh, yeah, what are we doing in the temple? We're worshiping pagan traditions. But it might have been the ancient Semitic way of having these professional lamenters lamenting so that our heart opens up. And that is still part of our tradition in a way, because Tisha B'Av is about lamenting. We preserve some of that lamenting. Thank you for bringing that, Lisa. Anyone else? I'm curious, one or two. Rabbi Neil, yes, please share with us. Unmute yourself.
Unmute, okay. Here, let me get this. I have a very difficult time with this holiday. Every year it turns around, it comes back. I've been in many contexts, whether it's been in Jerusalem or New York or other places in Morocco, observing this holiday, a time of great sadness, for sure. However, I'm gonna mention an experience that happened to me at the wall in Jerusalem about 30 years ago. It did not happen on Tisha B'Av. That's part of the dilemma. It is a Tisha B'Av experience from my point of view. I actually, about 30 or 35 years ago, went to the wall, a bit defiant, saying nothing to it. And sure enough, unexpectedly and spontaneously, I just broke apart. And I saw, it was a vision. I saw all of Jewish history from the time of Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac up through the Holocaust in deep, painful experiences. I actually went through the history, the painful experiences of the Jewish people. Now, to me, that would have been Tisha B'Av. It wasn't on the calendar, but it was a kind of an experience. What I want to say here is, I feel that when it comes to this time of the year and this holiday, I have to pretend to be sad. I have to say to myself, okay, this is how it's celebrated. This is a holiday of sadness. I gotta pretend to be sad, and I go along with the rest of the group, sit in dark rooms with candles, sing these very lamenting songs. But I have to say, it's not spontaneous. It's not coming from within. So that's my challenge about the holiday that I want to just put out there for everybody else. And that's it for now.
Wow. Neil, thank you for, first of all, sharing this very vulnerable experience of your loss and that vision you had at the wall. It is a powerful place with all of the caveats and politics. And I agree with you. And for those of us who are familiar with the rituals of Tisha B'Av in its current form, and those of you who went to American summer camp, you know what I'm talking about, or to the various synagogue experiences, we have very special rituals for this time. And they are about, again, I'll use the word manipulation carefully, the manipulation of somber grief. And it can work or it doesn't, but I feel like there's something here that's inviting us beyond the what's there already to go deeper. Why did they create this, and what can we do with this? So because of time, and forgive me, I wish this was a longer thing, but I know we all get zoomed out fast. I see Joan write, can't get married. I'm assuming you're just, since I know your husband, Joan, you're talking about what happens during this time of year. One cannot get married during these days, right. This is one of the ways in which we're supposed to manipulate our sense of grief and joy. There's a whole bunch of them. I'm gonna share the screen again, and I'm just gonna read with you rather fast the English translation of a Polish Jewish book of Jewish law from the 19th century, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, like the abbreviated book of Jewish law, of Halacha. And it's what a lot of us grew up with in the Ashkenazi normative Orthodox world. And it's just like a list of some of what you're not supposed to do on these 9 days. Okay? And again, the list is longer, but I chose some. Let me share this text again. Okay, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Here we go. Hebrew is there. I'm going to go for the English, and I'm going to read it fast. When the month of Av arrives, we should restrict such activities that create happiness. You should not build a building meant for enjoyment or strictly for relaxation. If you made a contract with a Gentile to have your house painted, there's a whole bunch of baggage there, and you can persuade them for small compensation to wait until after Tisha B'Av, that would be the right thing to do. But if they cannot be persuaded, you may have the work done. A Jew has a lawsuit against a Gentile, one should postpone it because it's an unlucky period, right? Again, there's a lot of stuff here we're not going to get into baggage-wise. Thank you for your patience. It is accepted custom in Israel not to eat meat or drink wine during the 9 days. From Rosh Chodesh, that was Tuesday, until after Tisha B'Av, right? You go dairy. I remember this vividly as a kid. It is even forbidden to eat food that was cooked with meat or that contains animal fat. Even poultry is forbidden. So it's probably a very, very ancient ploy of like the fish lobby to like make sure that, boy, are we in for 10 days. But beyond that, these are ancient traditions of what does it mean to minimize as much as you can that gives you the sense of joy, right? Meat, wine, new construction. A sick person is certainly permitted to eat food that was cooked with meat. For sick persons, all restricted are lifted. You should not wash any laundry during the 9 days. During these 9 days, it is also forbidden to put on laundered clothing or to spread linen, even if they were washed before. However, in honor of Shabbat, it's going to be tomorrow night, you may put on clean linen garments and spread a fresh tablecloth on the table and change washcloths and towels. Diapers may be washed. You should not take a bath during these 9 days. Y'all, we're talking Poland, 19th century. Vicious, even in cold water. Ugh. However, for medical reasons, you're permitted to bathe even in warm water, and there's like footnotes on that. Everybody should be medically permitted. These are just a few. Sex is debated, music, not, movies, not, TV, not. Growing up in Israel, some of you may have read my post about it. This is like the summer bummer. Like you're in the middle of summer vacation, and we were in all these like Jewish boy summer camps, and you're like, you can't do anything basically, play chess the whole damn time and read Talmud in the shade. So there are there's more baggage on this, but I'm just going to stop here for a moment. And I'm going to imagine with you what it's like to be a Jew in Spain in the 15th century or the 14th, to be in Casablanca, to be in Ethiopia, to be in Jerusalem, to be in Rhode Island, to be in all the places our ancestors came from. And this is not alien to our people. This practice of taking these days of denial of earthly pleasures so that we can focus on what hurts collectively, so that we exercise and maybe exorcise some of the trauma, but then we exercise a sense of the pain, maybe what's important, and then what do we do with it? What is the end goal here beyond memory? That's really the question that I want us to look at today. What is the journey from focusing on this grief towards some kind of growth? I want to say one more thing and then really open it up for some of your thoughts. There's a famous story, it is probably just a story according to historians, that is told about Napoleon, who during his reign walks around the streets of Paris, cloaked, covered up, as rulers like to do, according to legend, on the night of Tisha B'Av. And he walks by a little building and he sees a people, candles in the dark, and they're lamenting and they're crying and they're weeping and they're in distress. And he says, wow, what's going on? What happened here? And someone says to him, well, we're weeping because our temple was destroyed and our people were exiled and we were killed. And he said, what? I haven't heard about this. I know what's going on. And they said, oh, this happened, 1700 years ago. And he said, oh, wow, really? You're still crying? And the punchline is that people that can cry this long will live much longer, right? Having memory and having trauma is what builds identity. Now, we can go to the side of too much trauma, too much grief, too many Holocaust memorials, and not enough modern ways to live our lives. We can debate that. But at this moment in 2020, in the middle of pandemic, in the middle of this national reckoning with all of our personal and collective pains, I want to suggest that there's great merit for us taking these days, not just as Jewish memory, but as human memory. And what does it mean to create rituals like the conversation we're in tonight? The events we will be inviting you to do with us next week, the Kaddish that so many of us join online for these of grief and mourning that will help us just come to terms with our grief and mourning so that it isn't bottled up, so that it isn't forgotten, so that it can have a role in the composting of our worst memories towards the future flowerings that we must have. So my invitation for us, I'm going to invite us for the next really 15 minutes or so to hear from us. Where do you feel the need for these rituals of grief in your life? How would you like to think of adapting them? What is these 9 days about for you, if you've known them or not? And at the end, I want to share with you a few suggestions that I've collected over these past weeks for how we can personalize today and tomorrow, this Shabbat and Sunday, how we approach Tisha B'Av with whatever and whoever we are as a useful tool to grief and to grow. Knowing that Tisha B'Av is not the end of the story. This year, it's really yet again just another beginning. I'm going to pause for a second, invite us all to take a breath. We're dealing with tough stuff, with collective DNA, with visions of great horror, and with our personal truth right now. You've shown up tonight because this must be of meaning to you. Talking about grief is tough for whatever reason. I invite us to take another deep breath, really deep, and thank ourselves for just showing up. I'm going to read, if it's okay with you, the comments from Aluma and from Nicolina. And then Jack, if you don't mind, I would love to hear from you about your perspective as someone who's done so much work on rituals of grief and moving from our moral injury to our moral healing, where this thought meets you about the need to create these rituals. But let me just read the comments from Aluma. Nice to see you back, Aluma. Thank you. As a child, I never knew of this day. We were secular for the most part, though I remember being sad during these times. 20 years ago, when I was introduced to it, it made sense that my body reacted the way it did all these years. 10 years ago in Kohenet, which is the training of the feminist priestesses, sacred healers of our time, reinvented. Aluma is thankfully one of them. We were together for Tisha B'Av, and I was one of the wailing women through that night. The banging of stones, I saw war, destruction, pain. I remember it all, and my somatic sense knew this before I had the reason. Thank you so much, Aluma. Yeah, this is ancient stuff. This is pre-Semitic. We're just perpetuating it, and now we're reinventing it yet again. And Nicolina, whom I don't know, welcome, is sharing, I can't hear anything. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, but you left the meeting. Are the rest of you okay with hearing? Okay, thank you. So, all right. A bit of grief there, but hopefully Nicolina will be able to catch up on the recording when we send it after tonight. So Jack, my friend and teacher, please unmute. We'd really love to hear from you. Take a few minutes to share just what this brings up for you.
Thank you, Amichai. I think listening, I've never thought about this. These lines kind of brought an interesting thought for me. But I think that we've been talking about grief. We started with grief of in the song by Sinead O'Connor, which is a grief that kind of one that overwhelms one. You know, that it's a broken heart. There's no need to get in touch with that grief. It's there and present for one, and it's painful. And in the lines about the ritual of Tisha B'Av, it's talking about performing grief. So it's creating a different relationship to grief. And when you perform feelings that you no longer have direct access to, that are easily not remembered, it's easy to focus on the joys of life, you need to do something. You need to create some ritual in which you are creating it and performing, like with the women lamenting, or the people, the professional lamenters. You need to have something that creates it and makes it present because it's receded. And in that process of performing grief, I think that you end up reclaiming your agency in relationship to loss. Because as a performance, you are engaged actively in the making of that grief. So I thought that that's an interesting use of ritual in dealing with how to create a collective memory of grief, because it's not so easy to bring people together and to remember something that's painful. You really have to work hard at it. And I thought that what's nice about the performance of grief is that it lays the stage toward the performance of a vision of repair or a vision of transformation. You have to be actively involved in creating a vision of repair. It's not something that happens to you. So I think the active stance in relation to grief probably prepares you for being active in the process of repair.
Mm-hmm. I'm so struck, Jack, by your use of the word performance, right? It's a performance. And I know a lot of your work has been with looking not just at theater, but at art as a way to deal with whether it's veterans and people who've been at war or anybody with trauma. And we so often cannot even deal with our trauma. We just repress them. And art and performance and theater as a way to play and to allow us to actually deal so we can begin to heal. And the role of this performance, of this as if, so that you can really go there, because it's just so painful. And I'm thinking about the story that Lisa shared with us, that performance, the performance at the Armory, where we went to an art show. It was an art show at the Armory, and it was a bunch of people lamenting. But I remember everybody's face walking out of that Armory, and we were about 10 of us. We were ashen. We were part of a performance that was about deep lamenting, and I know I broke down in tears several times during that performance. I don't remember about what. There's no shortage of stuff to weep about. And I'm thinking about, Neil, what you were saying about the Tisha B'Av rituals that are so often performed but don't feel like they get you there in some way. And I'm sure that for many of us they do, or have, because there is performative manipulation in the Jewish tradition around these 9 days. What you eat, what you don't eat, what you listen to, what you don't listen to, and it's not just about grief. It's like a brokenheartedness, and it's manipulating us to go there individually and then communally, which is so much more vulnerable and sensitive. I really feel like over the last few years, Tisha B'Av, for me, is increasingly about just human pain, not just about Jewish memory, but I've never paid attention to these 9 days. I think everything is right. We're at a moment that like we're not going back to who we were. And I've been keeping each one of these 9 days, what 3 so far. I've given myself a corner of the day to be in grief. And I'm seeing Amy's comment that says, there's a few more that I'll get to in a moment. You know, grief doesn't need coaxing, you know, a parent as a child and not as a young adult. However, now I'm finding myself grieving unnecessary death from the virus. And as much the pillars of democracy that seem to be around us, et cetera, yes, we don't need a lot of coaxing for grief. There's so much around us. And yet, what will it be like to have these public containers, even like this one, when it's not just our grief and it's the grief? And how do we perform it? In the Spanish Portuguese synagogue in New York City, that I'm sure some of you know, they've really kept the Castilian and the Portuguese drama of mourning. It's like high drama. The candles are black. Everybody's on the floor. The music is like this lament, hypnotic. It's a performance. And I'm wondering how this year, whatever we will use, we will be able to bring ourselves deeper into this place so that we can come out of it on the other end. So I will share with you in a moment a few more ideas, but I want to open it up. If any of you want to share about any rituals that you've been observing or want to talk about. I'm seeing the comment from Jennifer. On Monday, I observed the 16th anniversary of my mom's death and shared a writing about my ongoing experience of the grief trauma. Growing up without her, I continue learning about the absolute importance of leaning into grief, of being vulnerable and not sweeping it under the rug. Creating more space to hold grief feels like one of the most human things I can do, and in turn further softens me to meet others in their pain. How beautifully written, Jennifer. Thank you. And for Rena, hi Rena. In grief, it's also possible to be only capable of performing joy. I'm not sure I understand that. Rena, do you want to share what you meant? I know you're an artist, so you were bringing us conceptual, abstract concepts. Yeah, you are unmuted.
I hadn't really planned on saying anything.
You don't have to, but thank you for
yeah, I think where I was trying to go with that, I'm feeling a lot of hesitancy, I guess, about navigating a lot of deep griefs and coming out of a period of time where I knew what feelings I was supposed to be feeling happiness, feeling joy. I could perform those just fine, and I did. But that was really distant from my interior life. And so I think that there's a flip side to that as well. So I guess I'm really interested in this mechanism of performing grief and performing communal grief, because I'm looking at it backwards. I've also never done it, so maybe that's part of my fascination. But then, what could that mean for communal grief to then, be reminded of, like, yes, this is a collective experience. You're not alone in this, and
right.
Then being pulled along on the other side. And what that can mean for resilience. So
right.
because I was performing joy, if I was capable of performing it, I guess whenever I look at something backwards, then that's what I'm trying to invoke by going through. Did that make sense?
It did. Thank you. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you, Rena. And I invite you this year to really experience this with a new reality. And I know for you, a lot of it is new. Like, what does it mean to try this Tisha B'Av, these 9 days? There is an element here, as Jack said, that if we want, as we know as humans, there is a prize at the end of the road, not always, but joy, happiness is sometimes the product of the work we do and how we show up, and looking at reality deeply. The notion of the internal life, looking at my interior life as an invitation. I think many of us, I'll speak for myself, prefer not to. I'd rather just Netflix and chill than sit here and delve on like what the hell I'm dealing with. But I'm dealing with, forget COVID for now, forget Trump and forget racism and forget Palestine and forget whatever. I got my own shit to deal with. And when do I give myself the time to sit and just be in grief? No, just buckle up and men don't cry and all that comes up. And you're like, well, actually, I need to. And I can do it by myself. And, Sinead was one of my heroes, and you two had that song, It's Time to Go Into Your Blue Room. And we know how to do the blues. But collectively, what's so interesting is that the Jewish tradition, based on earlier indigenous tradition, has on the calendar this period that says you are not alone. Your grief is not just yours. You are invited to lament. You're invited to keen. You're invited to think about the worst possible thing, the death of God. The original Sumerian Babylonian reason for this season, Tammuz, the month that just ended, is named for the god who dies in summer, the Sumerian god of vegetation. God is dead. And then the temple is dead. That's crying. Diaspora and exile cry. And the manipulation of grief, the performance of grief collectively in a synagogue or outside the UN or at the Western Wall, is an invitation that I think more than ever this year, I want to invite us to really think about as public rituals of grief that help us do everything we just said. And I'm aware that public in this case might mean on a Zoom. Fine. We're human. We've been here before. We're reinventing ourselves, but we're still here. And we're still going to weep. And Goddess knows I've wept on Zoom. I'm seeing a lot of you here. You've seen me lose it on Zoom, and I've seen you. And there's power in that. So I want to pause us for a moment, and I want to start taking us to where Reno is taking us, which is joy. That the healthy aspects of these rituals is to give us the space to grieve and mourn publicly and privately, or rather privately and publicly, so that we can go out the other way, so that we can build. And this is genius. Next Thursday, we're going to be practicing performing Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. I will put some links at the end, and they're on our website. We'll be with our friends from J Fridge out in Brooklyn for Lament. We'll be on the street. I don't know what it's going to be like. It will also be on Zoom. I think I will go out for that, masked and gloved. And the following day, we're going to be again on Zoom and in person together with our friends in faith from a few of the communities here in Harlem, to rise from the rubble of what's happening in this country and in the world right now and use Tisha B'Av for that. So we will create these public rituals. And then when Tisha B'Av ends next Thursday night, the journey continues. The next public ritual is the full moon of Av, the 15th of Av. That's going to be the following Wednesday. And we're going to have another spiritual study salon on the Thursday night, just the night after, to celebrate that, because the full moon of Av was an ancient, indigenous, and I use the word orgy, it's not totally accurate, but it was probably a love fest and a freedom of the grapes being harvested and love being celebrated. And you had to go there through the narrow straits to the dire straits of destruction to like really celebrate, I'm alive, I'm survived, let's dance in the vineyards and make love. Would that be fun? We'll figure out a Zoom version of it. And then 2 weeks after is a new moon of Elul. And then that's the month of reflection. How can I begin building my life if I haven't looked at what's broken? How can I honestly do the work of repentance, personally and collectively this year more than ever, if I haven't honestly wept through my regret of how I am part of what's messed up? And after that month begins Rosh Hashanah. and then you go into Yom Kippur. And then Yom Kippur ends by building a sukkah. So the crying for the burnt temple of Tisha B'Av ends by building a temporary dwelling of hope and love. And that's 70 days of go from joy, from oi to joy, from grief to growth, doing the internal work together as a community. Now, what I'm sharing with you right now, I think it's safe to say the majority of Jews don't know, even if we are very pious and observant and grew up in yeshiva and all that, because we've never been taught to think about this holistic map of consciousness as a journey that allows our grief to be manifest so that it can be channeled into whatever it's going to help us grow. Rabbi Alan Liu of blessed memory, who wrote a book, This Is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared, charts this map in it. If you start looking at the Kabbalistic text or even at the liturgy, you can see it's all there. But it's rarely outlined as an invitation for these series of private and public moments that help us go into where it's hard and into where it hurts. So we can see each other, hold each other, and then walk together to healing. You know, as Jack taught us, from the place of injury to the place of repair, it's not going to fix itself. We're not a forest. We need the work. So we're on day 3 of the 9 days. What are some ways in which we can tap into grief? You already showed up here tonight. There's an article, and I'm going to share a bunch of, well, actually, I want to share one more text, and then I want to share a few links with you, and then we're going to end at like 8:32. And those of you who want to stay on and chat for a little bit, I'm happy to. I'll stay on till 9 if anybody wants. But let me share just one more text with you about this trajectory that our ancestors understood and we have in some ways forgotten. Okay. So we are in the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, misspelled, that's unfortunate. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, anyone who eats or drinks on the 9th of Av as though he, one, ate or drank on the Day of Atonement. Hey, that's a big no-no. Fast in Tisha B'Av. My father of blessed memory, I think I shared that with you all a few weeks ago, who was a Holocaust survivor, was like, listen, I fasted plenty. Thank you very much. But he fasted on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur. Begrudgingly, frankly, but he did. So, but look at this interesting text here. What Shimon ben Gamliel, we are now in the 3rd century CE, and in the Galilee, we are a generation and a half after the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is like the great-great-grandson of the last leader of Jerusalem at its glory days. He says, if you don't take this 9th of Av thing seriously, you're like desecrating our Holy of Holies. But he's also already linking the map, the historical moment between fasting on Tisha B'Av all the way to Yom Kippur. You're not going to do this work. How are you going to do that work? Right? There is a link. Rabbi Akiva says, another one of the greats, anyone who does work on the 9th of Av will never see in one's work any sign of blessing. Don't go to work this day. This is a day of business not as usual. And the sages say anyone who does work on the 9th of Av and does not mourn for Jerusalem will not share in her joy. As it is said, rejoice with Yerushalayim, with Jerusalem, and be glad with her, all that love her, rejoice for joy with her, all that mourn for her. And from here they said, anyone who mourns for Jerusalem merits to share in her joy, and anyone who does not mourn for her will not share in her joy. Take Jerusalem now as a metaphor, as a concept for the city of peace, for the holistic dream of being, and how it says, if I'm not going to go through the joy, through the grief with others, then how can I be there when we walk out the other side? Whatever redemption might mean. So these seeds of going from one to the other are already in there as a process. And these verses from Lamentation, I'm going to leave for next week. So finally, friends, as we bring this conversation to an official close, I hope that for some of you, these concepts of these 9 days and what Tisha B'Av is about, both historically, liturgically, and emotionally, is helpful as new or renewed information. And that as we all take stock of our own lives, our own griefs, our own needs, we find ways to give little corners of our daily existence these 9 days while everything's already going on to ritualize our grief. There's a tradition that when you paint a house in a Jewish home, you leave one little corner unpainted for the destruction of the temple. Has anyone heard of that? I see Neil nodding. It's such an interesting custom, right? Thousands of years after that trauma, when I'm going to paint my house, I'm in the middle of painting my house, you're going to leave one little corner unpainted because there was trauma, because life sucks, because there's death, because it's pretty and I'm lucky. But never forget, not just the trauma, but never forget the importance of never forgetting. So I want to invite you to think what little corner of your wall, of your life, of your heart you might want to leave unpainted. What burger you might put down, a glass of wine you might not drink, or what music you might carefully curate, or what film you might want to watch. So yes, you'll weep. Choose a tearjerker over a comedy. I don't know. And maybe do it with others. Is there a way for us to reach out to each other via text or phone or call or visit and say, hey, can we just take a walk and talk about what hurts? Can I have some grief dates this week? I did it today. I reached out to someone, and I know we haven't talked in quite a few months, but I want to invite you to have a grief walk with me and talk about what hurts. She was rather shocked, but this is a person who could appreciate and needed it. So that's one invitation for us. And in the articles that I want to share with you right now, and these will also be, I think, emailed, I want to share just two with you right now in the chat box. One is from the NAP Ministry, that if you don't know, please get to know the NAP Ministry. They're thinking about new rituals for our lives. They're not Jewish or religious. NAP is a religious obligation, in case you haven't known that, not just on Shabbat. The NAP Ministry has this lovely article about grief and how to use it in our lives. And they talk about grief jars. Have a little jar in your house and put in it, whenever you want, a piece of paper with like, what's hurting? What's my grief? Create this altar, this monument of grief, whether in time or in space. Give it space. Don't just avoid it. During these 9 days, we're not saying forever. There are other ideas in this article that I recommend for you to read. I think you can copy from this chat. Yes? Brian, you're nodding? I hope so. If not, check out the NAP Ministry and look for grief. It's one of helpful resources out there. The second, many of you know I'm a big fan of Krista Tippett and On Being. And a few years ago, she interviewed Ruby Sales, civil rights heroine and legend. Ruby is in her late 70s, I believe, if not 80s. And that episode is called Where Does It Hurt? And in the moment of this racial reckoning and this human moment of pandemic, Ruby's interview is about going to the place of grief carefully and with respect, and not alone, but going there. Otherwise, we will never be able to enjoy the redemption. So these are just two gifts. I want to invite you, friends, we're going to end in just a moment. I'll end with a bit of music, to take a breath, a deep one, as we sit here together, each in our Zoom reality, talking about something we don't often talk about, inviting ourselves to this conversation. Evan, I see your comment, and I'll read it in just a second. Thank you for sharing it. Then I'll put a bit of music on, and then I'll invite those of you who want to stay on for a bit and share, please do so. We'll be together next week for Tisha B'Av. We'll be together the week after for Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. And then we're going to begin the journey of rising up into the rest of this new year with many, many ways. I hope we can grieve together so we can be in joy together on this and every night. Evan has commented, I wanted to add that a friend once shared his thought that this is a time that we are allowed to be angry with God, when at other times we accept God's judgment. Now we do not. And the tradition gives us this permission to feel that anger fully. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Evan. That's very profound. Right? If the ancient pagan is about that God is dead, then we're saying, God, what is this? So for whatever it is, grief and rage, this is a container for us to go to where we usually don't. We've got to do it safely. We've got to do it together. The last months in the streets of America, I've seen a lot of people go to the place we haven't gone before, where the rage and the grief is vented so we can change because we have to. How much more so for each one of us and our souls. Take another breath. I'm going to play one more short thing. Feel free to leave if you want, or stay on and we can chat a little more. And I wish us all Laila Tov, good night, good grief, as easy as you can. If you have any questions or thoughts, be in touch. I'm easily found. And thank you all for joining me tonight. Give me a second to play my track.
By the waters of Babylon, we laid our lyres down, laid our lyres down. We sat and cried by the waters of Babylon. We sang no sacred songs, sang no sacred songs. Our tongues were tied. Whoa, oh, 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 If I forget you, Jerusalem, I'll play no more again. Play no more again. Not one more time. Won't you show me Jerusalem? Raised and broken. Raised and broken. Alone on high. La
Joey Weisenberg. Well, friends, thanks for sticking around for the after talk. There's no agenda for this. This is just hanging out.
I
I'm
wanted to,
inviting anyone who wants to share something. Yeah, Roxanne, hello, my neighbor.
hi, nice to see you, Amichai.
You too. Hi, Michael.
I wanted to tell you that I grew up in a home that was really very secular. And my friends all went to a synagogue and I didn't. And I wanted to take Hebrew lessons, which my parents let me do. And I wanted to go to Israel, which my parents let me do when I was 14, which was not common for American non-practicing Jews to do in those days, in the early 60s. And I spent a summer at Kfar Silver, which was an agricultural training school with a group of kids, American kids and some Israeli kids. And the point of my story is that it was my first exposure not only to Israel and Jewish practices and the land, but also to Tisha B'Av. And it was like a revelation, these holidays that I'd never heard of and the practices. And it was like an introduction on so many levels that it still sticks with me. That I don't remember what we did. Probably we fasted that day. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think some of these memories, especially from childhood, go back. And like we said, they're so visceral because they are embodied, right? You might not remember that you're fasting, but think about it. The notion of fasting, Kippur, Tisha B'Av, what does that do to us? And then, my memories as a kid of Tisha B'Av is this, not just the 9 days of, the summer bummer, but the aware, and I'm a Holocaust kid. My father was always there, but everything was on steroids on Tisha B'Av. And again, I think this is a year of this is a game changer year in many ways of how to take it to a deeper place. I love what Evan said about the permission to not just to be angry at God, but to question, to use grief as a place of the permission to be in a place of broken that isn't because I'm in personal grief, because I'm a human. And this shit's real. I've spoken plenty. Y'all talk. What's Julia, a beautiful poem about grief. Oh, by Warsan Shire. Oh my gosh. Do you want to read it, Julia? Out loud? Maybe let's leave it to the end. Let's leave some poetry for the end. Anyone else? Thoughts, comments, memories, things this makes you think about? Ideas for how to ritualize grief, maybe, these days? Feel free to unmute.
Hi, I'm Evan. Interestingly, the last speaker mentioned that she had been unfamiliar. She hadn't grown up with Tisha B'Av until she was exposed to it at 14. And something that made me think of is actually in the season of The Marvelous Miss Maisels, which just passed. There was a Tisha B'Av episode, which was interesting, and the episode included a scene in the shul at the Fleischmann stand-in, where the only people in the shul were the rabbi and the brother's wife who had converted from probably Christianity to Judaism. And those were the only people there. And the wife was the only one who was actually enacting these morning rituals. And I thought that was fascinating because it spoke to a time when this was a holiday or a memorial time to be disregarded in American Jewish history anyway. And I think that was a tremendous loss. And one of the things that made me think about was just how this is a time where we as Jews, but also writ large, need these kinds of rituals more than ever, maybe, in order to channel collective grief and anger and be able to have some kind of method by which to unify around it in a powerful way, other than the tools that we obviously do have, protest, etc. But like, it's another tool, an ancient tool that I think is appropriate now, especially in the context of something like Lab Shul, to also grab and use in a new, powerful way. That's my thought.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you. And thank you for bringing that crazy cultural memory. It's true. I remember, wow, oh my God, the Mrs. Maisel. For those of you who have it, okay, I think I'm going to have to like excerpt a bit of it for whatever we do next week. I mean, that show is just a whole other, you know, PhD in American Jewish everythingness. But yeah, I remember watching it and thinking the uncomfortableness that this one woman who got it was a Jew by choice, who got it and needed it because her own marriage was whatever, right? I'm curious, folks. There's people here from so different aspects.
Maybe we didn't stick with.
Have you had good experiences, like interesting experiences of Tisha B'Av? Something that stays with you, where and like that felt compelling. That felt like, you know, what Evan was talking about, like rituals that are compelling. Like Roxanne mentioned one, Neil mentioned one, Aluma, your reintroduction to it, to the Kohenet's work. I'm curious, folks. Anyone else has any containers of Tisha B'Av? Yeah, sorry. Are you indeed in Sweden? Sorry. Wow, what time is it over there?
It's almost 3 in the morning.
Okay, wow, good morning. Okay, so sleep talk us through a Tisha B'Av memory.
Well, I went to Ramaz for 13 years, and honestly, I was always in camp, and I didn't take it seriously. I felt guilty, but I just didn't pay attention. And I think now that you take this up, I joined because, but I don't feel I have to create some forced ritual. It feels like I'd like to take the opportunity in Sweden to invite my friends to come together and really share about the grief we're feeling in life, and personally or collectively. And there's so much grief that we feel, and it's so easy to tap into all the grief. So I think it would be very useful to create a beautiful space to share.
Thank you. Sorry, that's such a wise idea, to just create our own grief circles, like our own ways of lamenting.
Yeah, I mean, I was leading like a death cafe in Sweden for like a number of times every week for like 2 months, and I took up the question about how do we mourn and what's the tradition in Sweden for mourning, because a lot of mourning in the culture in Sweden is about get on with life and be strong. So Shiva wasn't so popular, so it's. You know, so I was trying to help look at mourning and grieving and try to create space for that. So I think this is a good opportunity to see if I could create something for Tisha B'Av here.
Please let us know. It's very powerful. Yeah, you know, and I have to say, I'll share a confession that over the years, you know, as you know, and many of you are part of the Lab Shul family so intimately, and those of you are not, you are now. You know, a lot of our experimentation was like, how do we take what we inherited and make it deeply ours in ways that make sense to who we are? If we are like, you know, queer or biracial or, you know, Jewish, and all the various ways that we are. And part of my discomfort with Tisha B'Av in the last few years, as we've been experimenting with, I'd say the last decade really, publicly, not my private, was that so much of the public about the Jerusalem destruction, temple, that narrative, and even though I know some of us know that it's about the metaphor, not just about the nationalistic collapse of autonomy and authority and the death of temple and God, that is the text. Like Eicha, the lamentation is a haunting poem of loss. But in the context of it, it's not that it's not about politics, about Zionist or Israel. It's not about that. It's just about that it was hard to create the oomph of what it's about, which Sari was just saying, a circle of people using the poetry as the pretext for sharing our grief. There was grief, but it became all about the text. Like we performed that text, Eicha. And certainly in the States, for most people, that text is unintelligible. It's like, it's like me going to Shakespeare. I'm like, I don't know what the hell is going on. Honestly, I don't get Shakespeare in English, never did. ESL, leave me alone. So like Eicha, for most people, like in Lamentations, is like, and we cry and we sad and we manipulate and there's candles and sad music on the floor, but we're not doing the real work of the grief work in some way, like the sharing in some way. And then by the time you're done with Eicha, it's been 12 years later, and like, who wants to think? But we will be part of Eicha this year as part of the protest in Brooklyn and online. And we'll be doing the thing in the afternoon, but it makes me think, sorry, it's a great idea for us to find, even in the evening or day, and even invite those of us who want on Zoom, to just have a grief circle. Just ask Ruby Sales' question, where does it hurt? And allow ourselves to do it. Maybe not at 3 a.m, let you go to sleep, but maybe at midnight. I'm serious. Midnight on the Jewish calendar. Any of you familiar with Tikkun Chatzot? Like the midnight fix, they sometimes call it. Tikkun Chatzot is a very strange, I'm seeing some of you nodding, so you either were there, you know about it. Tikkun Chatzot is a Kabbalistic tradition where you stay up at night, lament the exile. Mystics do it. I've never done it. I'm like a wannabe mystic, but this might be the year to do it. Okay, stay tuned. I might be pissing off the actual tech team by saying, hey guys, we're adding an event at midnight on Thursday and Wednesday night or whatever. It might happen. Stay tuned. Or maybe we'll like do midnight in Tokyo, which is like 3 p.m. here or something. Whatever. We'll figure it out. Tikkun Chatzot will be interesting to bring out, just a weeping. Others, thoughts, reflections?
Yeah, it's Daniel.
Daniel.
I really like the idea of like having a grief date or a grief buddy, just to talk, to share that with. I think I think it helps with the processing of grief to not do it alone. And I'm thinking too about snippets of movies and songs that I can listen to over the next period of time to just help tap into that.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I think the finding a buddy, that's reaching out to someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recommend that. Thank you. Aluma, you wanted to share?
Something that we did at Kohenet once, and I don't think it's possible to do on Zoom, but it's something someone can do on their own, is we created a structure with stones beforehand. And as we started the reading, everybody took a stone and destroyed what we created. And we used those stones to bang during the reading. So you could actually, your bodies could reverberate with stones coming apart with your own destruction, your own memory. And then the next day we rebuilt. So it's something someone can do at home. I mean, I know we want to be doing things together, but to create like some stone structures, something that you feel you can create, take apart, and then restructure.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very beautiful. One of the things we'll be doing next Thursday during our Rise from Rubble ritual, which will be in Morningside Park, and on Zoom is we'll be working with stone structures, and we're going to leave something behind there as this image of the rubble. We'll invite people at home to either take stones or other objects. So you're right on target. There's something about this, the primal of the rock. Thank you.
I do have a question though. This talking about the manipulation to bring the grief about, I understand that, but isn't there also something to be said about somatically just feeling this without even knowing about it? I mean, doesn't anybody else's body just kind of change as we start entering the 3 weeks without manipulation? Just like, oh, my body's feeling super heavy and I'm really sad. And I think that it's something that's imprinted, at least in me.
Wow. I don't know. I'm seeing Louis nodding. Yeah, Louis, you're feeling it? I mean, I'm not sure. It's a fascinating question. Does it exist beyond the cultural thing? Hi, Louis.
Hey there. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, you know, it's something that you can just sort of tap into, is the reality of grief. Because I think we've all lost people at some point in our life, and no matter how much time goes by, when you really acknowledge the reality of the fact that you're never going to see that person again and you'll never hear their voice and what that loss really means. And then outside of these like very literal losses, there's ambiguous loss. So like the moment that we inhabit now feels like communal loss, where we thought life would be one way. And right now, in many ways, we're mourning the life that we're not living. So for me, this past week, you know, since March, I've been keeping it together, quote unquote, and I had my structures. And this week, I really just let that go and acknowledge the fact that it's the middle of July, and usually I would want to be on an adventure somewhere, and instead I'm staying inside. And instead of going to the beach, I'm laying on my yoga mat and pretending that I'm on the beach, and acknowledging that I don't necessarily feel comfortable going to a crowded beach right now, and what that loss feels like. So I feel like there's a difference between performance and ritual, and the ritual can help us tap into what's there that we may not want to acknowledge because it's a difficult emotion and a difficult reality, but it's always there.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you for sharing that.
I just want to add that like what I agree on this chain and I feel is really powerful is that there are a lot of stories in Judaism about women that aren't told. And I was listening to a feminist podcast, and it was an ancestral healing type of podcast. And they were talking about this historian who had gone to Greece to, you know, live on the island of Lesbos and find out the history. And so she said that she was just going to these ancient sites and sitting on the earth and listening to that. And I feel that that's there for all of us, to be in touch with our ancestral rhythms and history by just listening into ourselves and connecting to the world around us.
Fascinating. I mean, it goes back to what, you know, what Aloma was saying, like, is it in our bodies in some way? I want to say that for me, as somebody who's so attuned to the Jewish calendar, it's like, that's how I live. And for sure, you know that like when Tammuz come, it's like, here comes the, you know, that again. And then when, you know, and again, this year more than ever, but like in some ways it's always been there. And this year, activated. So, you know, maybe for some of us, the sensory has been more palpable, but for me, it takes the manipulation, it takes the performance, it takes the ritual to induce me to go there, to seduce me to go there. Because I think most of us would rather not, frankly. You know, Louis, even right now, yeah, I'm bummed about, you know, and I did go to the beach and it felt weird, but I had to, and I'm back and I'm like, oh no, now I'm home. Vacation's over, I'm all by myself, fuck. But I'd rather not deal with it. But now I'm making myself deal with it so that I can deal with it, so I can heal with it in some way. Yeah, Lisa, and then I think we're gonna have a poem, and then we're gonna say goodnight. Hey, Lisa.
Just
Sure.
hi. Quick question, sort of like related to all of this, which is, as this is a time of grief already, for me and for many people, how personal do you, how much do you bring the personal into this period of grief? In other words, how do those things come together? Like, how does one use this time to bring the grief that you're already practicing through different rituals, or, well, just having all the time? If that, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does.
Sort
I
of
just
really
want-
interested in the idea of this holiday or holiday.
Right.
And how,
Lisa, I just want to say, I know we were on the Kaddish call today, and I know that I want to acknowledge that you're asking this question as a human who's been dealing with a lot of loss this last year. And so, and you're not alone. Your story and your families is unique. I think we bring to these public rituals all of our private selves, and we have the permission to be private in public and to, mourn your father and, what your mom has gone through and what you're going through and who you are, and use this public, I'm going to say spectacle, this public building of like the loss of so much, to say, yes, this is collective grief. I'm part of a collective, and I'm bringing mine to it because it's the opportunity to do so. It's what art does, right? If you go to the opera and there's La Boheme and Mimi dies at the end, and like, what? Of course I cry my brains out when Mimi dies at the end. She's died every damn time. But it's like, I'm not crying about Mimi. She never existed. But grief circles where we use Tisha B'Av as a way to say we're part of something bigger. There wasn't about the personal. It was about the big collective, and really it's about, in many ways, the personal.
just a quick note, you're freezing a lot, I think.
I know my Wi-Fi is losing it. I think after about an hour or so of Zoom, my everyone's just like, okay, we're done, everybody. With that, it's 9 p.m. Julie, I'm going to invite you to maybe read that beautiful poem for us. Are you able to do that? You are unmuted. Maybe you're not unmuted, but Julia, I can see that you unmuted. Uh-oh, I think I froze. Friends,
Can
this
you hear
is probably, we can. I think it's my Wi-Fi that's a little tricky. I apologize.
No, it's okay. You can hear me now. Yes?
Yes, please read it to us, Julia, and then with that, we'll say goodnight. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Here we go. They set my aunt's house on fire. I cried the way women on TV do, folding at the middle like a 5-pound note. I called the boy who used to love me, tried to okay my voice. I said, hello. He said, Warsan, what's wrong? What happened? I've been praying, and these are what my prayers look like. Dear God, I come from 2 countries. One is thirsty, the other is on fire. Both need water. Later that night, I held an atlas in my lap, ran my fingers across the whole world and whispered, where does it hurt? It answered, everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. That's it.
That's it indeed. Thank you for this powerful closing, Julia. Friends, with that, may it hurt, may it heal, may we feel, may we show up. Thank you for showing up tonight, old and new friends. Please don't hesitate to send any feedback or emails to me. I'm back in town and I'll respond. Have a good night, and I'll see you very soon. Shabbat Shalom, almost.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Thank you all.